That's weird. It doesn't normally echo. Doesn't matter. Uh, Today, I'm basically gonna be going over the moral and philosophical implications of some superpowers. I guess you guys are just gonna watch, really. Yeah. This is being recorded, so at the end of this, I'm probably gonna post it. But yeah, with that, let's begin. I'm gonna grab my notes. So I am back. Basically, I have these notes. So I guess I should go over one of the most commonly talked about superpowers. It's really just annoying at this point to me. I'll pull it up from the poll. So basically, I wanted to go over super speed. Despite how often media conceptualizes the power as this ability to just move faster than everybody, sort of like as if time's paused. It's really not that clear cut. For instance, a problem with super speed would be, would super speed work with your body and your mind? So, I believe it's the tiger beetle that is capable of moving extremely fast relative for its size, but its mind literally can't keep up, so it's just a blur. Also, would your mind just be so fast that your body can't keep up? Myri used a poison, the superhuman drug, on Silo Paro during or in Bleach. I can't remember the exact episode, but it basically speeds up Siloparo's senses to where it's a second feels like a century, and his body basically can't move, even though he's perfectly aware of stuff. And Myri's basically just stabs him, and his death, which would be a couple of like seconds or minutes on screen, ends up feeling like millennia to Siloparo, who's basically left at the end begging for the sword to reach his heart and end him. Pretty gruesome, but that's Myri for you. Suffice to say, super speed isn't, even if super speed is not a power that's as clear cut. And let's say you get the perfect version, the version where the one Flash has is where it's all fancy and whatnot, where it's I can move super fast, so fast that time appears to be slowed down or non-existent. Well, other than the physics, we're not gonna do that. That's a video for another day. What's this? What are the moral implications for this? You basically can move in stop time and reach any location instantaneously within real time. And I assume you don't age, because Flash doesn't age ridiculously. whilst he's in that slowed time. So I assume aging wouldn't apply. So what would this feel like? Would it feel like walking, but all time is paused, or would it feel like so walking or all time is paused, or would it feel weirder or more unusual? Where time itself um is like stopped, but you can still move at super speed. That would just be ridiculous, because then you could just run through. You have no reason to not be able to get rid of almost every crime on the planet. You can move across the planet at super speeds whilst time is stopped. Not, mind you, not whilst you're capable of moving in regular time. Whilst it is stopped. The crime itself is currently stopped. All of time is. You could move everyone who needs to the hospital. You could move the objects to the hospital. Heck, if you did it right, you could probably learn how to be a doctor and fix the person up yourself. Of course, as for how that works with your memory, would be a very interesting matter. An interesting idea I've had in the past would, like, for a superhero or villain, is just this villain slash hero who's in this sort of stopped time realm, or stopped slash super time realm, and they can occasionally come out of it, but whilst in stopped time, they have all the time in the world, so they can learn all of these abilities and whatnot, but it slowly fades away from their memory, or quickly, and then they only end up being able to use it for a little while. Pretty interesting idea, but suffice to say, super speed's really interesting when you think about it, because it's related to this concept of how time and space are so relative to us. Like, space would be such a relative. I don't think space is talked about as much in the speed formula. Like, we know how time is slowed down if you're moving fast enough, but would space just become contracted or something? Like, if you're moving fast enough, would it just be like the space between you and an object becomes zero? Like, you instantly move towards the object? Well, not instantly, but hyper speed move towards the object? If you did, well, what are the implications exactly? It's basically teleportation. Space itself is distorted. You all locations are basically within the same distance away from you. Just imagine how interesting that would be. The whole universe. Like, if you were to bring someone into your variant of space slash time, the whole universe would be accessible to them. Now, as for going through and specifically guiding themselves through this said universe to where they don't crash or end up where they don't want to, that would be interesting in and of itself. Like, for someone who's so fast that they literally can't even tell where their location is because they're just that fast. Like, would it be something like some superheroes used their speed to the highest extent and ended up in the other side of the universe? Super speed's very interesting morally to me. And that doesn't even go into the moral ethic usage so much, which would basically be, if I have super speed, who couldn't I beat with time or at all? If you have super speed, you can move backwards in time or forwards in time. It doesn't matter which, really. But if you were to move backwards in time, well, you could figure out the enemy's past and see. You could prevent them from being born. That's probably something Reverse Flash does, or does, like, consistently, or would do. Or you could learn of their weaknesses. You could create a weakness in the past. Just imagine that. Like, just fighting an enemy, and then whilst you guys are stuck in time for a brief moment, like, you go back into their past and create a weakness, like, oh, they have this mental thing with fire or something. It becomes really interesting morally, and a villain that sort of dives into that, he's not a speedster or speed based, but like, when he stabs you with his sword, he goes into your past, and then he can insert himself in there. His name is Tsukishima, and his power is Book of the End, I believe. Very interesting character, possibly one of the most immoral and evil villains within all of Bleach, other than, well, you know who, and if you don't, maybe I shouldn't be doing Bleach spoilers like that for you, but suffice to say, super speed brings up really interesting questions morally. Another thing that's really interesting is super strength. What would it be like to be this strong? Like, how would you would have to actively make sure that you're restraining yourself. Would you even have control? Would it just be like every action you do is super strength? Would your own bones be able to withstand that? Like me holding, like, you know how some people like slap their head sometimes, slap their, just like a sort of moment. Would that just kill someone? Would that kill you? Super strength could also be viewed in the context of, hey, you might be super strong and whatever, but I kidnapped your family and I've placed them into a prison slash area where I can kill them immediately somewhere on the planet, and unless you do what I say and punch who I want you to punch, you will never see them again. Super strength can't fix that. You can't punch your way out of that problem. Similarly, the press, how Lex Luthor manipulates the press towards Superman, I've always found that interesting. Especially during the Justice League Unlimited show, with he seemed reformed. Superman and Shazam got in a fight. Superman seems like the bad guy. Superman can't punch the press into liking him again or anything like that. So that's really interesting from a moral standpoint, viewpoint. And then another thing with super strength is, let's see. Would you ever really be wanted? Like, how would that change people's view of you? It's no longer, oh, it's just Joe Schmo, or it's just John. It's now like, it's this incredibly strong guy. Let's try to get him to work for our circus show. If he lifts up a couple of elephants, maybe we could get a good act or some good bucks, something like that. Would you use your super strength, like flex it off, to make money? I know certainly that I would be using my superpowers to try and make money, but suffice to say, it's pretty crazy to think about. Super strength's basically, another thing is saving people. The physics behind it, I'm not gonna get into that because once again, another video. But the math and physics behind it, if you're not very careful, you're gonna kill someone whilst trying to save them, and that's just a sad truth. Let us see. Flight. Flight's really interesting because flight's always been this sort of thing humans have, flight's been something we've wanted ever since societies have really become a thing. Not even, or maybe even back when we were in groups, like the ability to fly. Think about the applications or how it would be applied by a person. For someone like a pilot, why would they want the ability to fly? They love flying via an aircraft or a machine like that. They don't want this ability to fly is helpful, sure, but first off, they already have the ability to fly, so they wouldn't really use it. Secondly, for someone like let's be honest, most of the millennials and Gen Z, as much as I hate to admit a lot are stupid, a lot can also be very sinister in terms of superpowers. I'm certain some of you would be like, well, you didn't say how fast, or you didn't say what this, so I'm gonna rob a bank now. Which, I'm gonna be honest, I'd probably watch someone do just for the fun of it. Like, I'm not gonna actively try to stop a bank robbery if I'm far away and it's not affecting me. But yeah, that would be pretty interesting to watch for sure. Suffice to say, um, flight's really interesting. A caveman, what were their thoughts of flight? Well, probably the thought that it's this thing that only a god could do, that it's impossible, that there's always a catch or a caveat, that there has to be some reason that men don't fly like their divine like their divine counterparts, which Daedalus, not Daedalus, wait, Icarus. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of something else at the moment, which Daedalus showed. Um, why did I say Daedalus? I'm thinking of that might be his father, but I could be wrong. But suffice to say, Icarus, I know for sure Icarus, flew too close to the sun. His wings melted, and then he drowned and died, or he fell on the rocks and died. Either way, he died. So suffice to say, that probably was sort of something that sort of made humans go, well, flying seems kind of dangerous. Flying is very dangerous. Imagine today. First off, there are insects and birds and other stuff in the air. If you're flying at a certain speed, you're gonna run into that stuff, and if it runs into you, and if you run into it, and or vice versa, it's gonna mess you up. I promise you, you will not enjoy that experience. It will be traumatizing, I'm sure. But suffice to say, flying's dangerous. Imagine a city. You would have to be flying well above the not canopy. I'm thinking of a jungle now. But you'd have to be flying well above the city in order to city's buildings in order to make sure you don't crash into any of them. Um, Imagine just like someone flying in between the buildings. Like that would be incredibly dangerous. Uh, what happens during an earthquake? That's gonna affect you because you're flying at the level of the buildings or beneath them. So if one collapses, you might get hit. You fall. You die. Um, let's see another thing. With flying, it's really interesting that no one brings up how you can only go up to around 12,000 feet before you pass out from there not then being enough air. So at 12,500 feet, you'd probably be passing out and then falling to your death. Also, I hate to tell you, but we're in a society full of humans. Whether they're good or bad, up to you. But suffice to say, there would be regulations. If you had the ability to fly, how scared do you think a government would be? Especially if they don't know you can fly into the atmosphere for all they know. You could fly to another planet for all they know. But suffice to say, that's a terrifying thought. Just imagine you have to defend hundreds of millions of people, and now there's someone capable of flying and threatening that. And if there are more people capable of flying, they are definitely going to make regulations. So you better not be having any kids or teaching people how to use your powers. Because then the government's going to say, you can't fly above this much, you can't fly to this fast, you're going to have to pay a tax or a fee, you're going to have to make sure someone's tracking you, you're going to have to make sure, you're basically going to get subjected to a bunch of rules like an aircraft would. But on the bright side, if you use your power fast and soon enough, you could possibly bomb a couple buildings and then extort the government, or or just a bunch of governments. It really depends on how you do it. Weirdly enough, I'm pretty sure there's a machine like an aircraft, not aircraft, but like it's this thing where it can fly underwater. So, if you found a way to get oxygen down there, you could possibly be flying underwater or in other mediums, which is a pretty interesting concept. You wouldn't be able to fly in space, of course, because there's no air. But suffice to say, flying's really interesting. Um, Especially when you consider the fact that people are probably gonna either see you as some sort of deity, some sort of alien, and or the government's gonna try putting a bunch of restrictions on you. Um, but yeah. Okay. Here's the most morally duplicitous one. Telepathy slash empath powers. Well, it's pretty obvious. Empaths and telepaths on shows pretty consistently violate the mental sanctity of their friends and comrades and enemies to say, oh, you're feeling this way, why? Or, oh, you're filled with this, why? You're thinking this, why? Well, that's first off, that's an invasion of the mind. Um, I'm gonna be honest. If I knew people could read minds, I'd either a think of a bunch of dark thoughts, so probably watching a bunch of people dying millions of times over, in order to make sure they don't try reading my mind, or b come up with some sort of weapon that neutralizes their ability. The governments or black op agencies, or really agencies trying to defend something particularly valuable like corporations, would definitely come up with the power to block telepaths out. Also, funnily enough, telepaths, um, if you're what's the definition of telepathy? The exact definition here. Okay, so maybe I should have specified that telepathy in this context means mind reading too, for this conversation. But yeah, just think about how interesting that is. For mind reading and empath, like, what happens when someone's just a bad person? Like, I hate to admit, I hate to admit it to you guys and tell you guys this, but there are a lot of bad people, a lot of morally not so okay people. I personally don't really have a lot of problems with morals. I find it conceptually irrelevant considering the infinitude of different scenarios that one would face. Um, but suffice to say, morals aren't something that are universal or constant or even understood. So, who is a mind reader or a mind controller to say you should be doing this, or why do you think this way? What's to stop a mind reader from accidentally reading the minds of thousands of people? Like, I know they're concentrating for one person, but what happens when you just decide to stop reading mind, like concentrating on that one person? Does it? It's like when you put your ear up against the door to hear the room and your parents talking. Like, what happens once you take your ear off that room and your mind off of that? You hear everything else around you. So telepaths would need some sort of method to either block other people's thoughts out, or to block specific thoughts of their own out. Otherwise, people would be knowing everything. So their thoughts, their memories, their search history. Though let's be honest, no one wants to know anyone else's search history. Um, Suffice to say, mind reading and telepathy are very morally interesting because you could blackmail someone. Like, I could telepathically say, "Oh, I know where you are," and I can communicate. I know where you are. Unless you give me $50,000, I will tell every single government agency on the planet where you are, and they will all come to assassinate you, which would be very good against terrorists. Of course, if I was using it against terrorists, I would probably be getting money paid. Um, Come on, I'm not gonna do it for free, and I honestly wouldn't expect anyone else in the world to do it. Well, a lot of other people to do it for free either. It's a job. It's a possible way to get money. I'm not going to be morally concerned in that moment. Yeah, but suffice to say, it's really interesting. Another interesting thought is maybe the possibility of like this sort of um, ancient or really old or immortal person with telepathy having told millions of people around the planet, oh, I know this, I can communicate with you. What if that's really what some deities are? Just aliens or humans that are that have longevity and have just been just telepathically communicating with humans to mess with them. I know that I would certainly try that for fun. I wouldn't try becoming a god or anything. That's just stupid. But like, I'd definitely have some fun with that. Just like, I know your cousin, Joel. I don't have a cousin, Joel, but you have one nonetheless. I'd mess with people like that. It would just be funny or interesting at the very least. Interestingly enough, you could probably make a couple $1 trillion off this if you read everyone's mind, because you could then gain information. Like, I'm certain there is someone alive on the planet right now who has survived major diseases and/or cancer, and they probably and you could probably mentally communicate with them and read their mind or and go like, hey, I'll tell you a person who survived this, but you have to pay me money. And then people pay money to go find these specific people. You could also become the ultimate dating person too, but I wouldn't recommend that, and I personally wouldn't do that. That would just feel weird. uh let's see, there are a bunch of other superpowers that I'd like to go over. um Common superpowers people ask for, yes. Okay. Um, Invulnerability. This is an interesting one. So, invulnerability is the idea of being invulnerable. So, it being impossible to harm or damage someone, or that object. As much as I love the song Impossible, that is not the time. Um, so invulnerability is really interesting because it's like, oh hey, you can't harm me. There's no way to harm me. Um, so what would you do with invulnerability? Think about this. If you're invulnerable, nothing can harm or damage you. So anything you do would logically be would logically not harm or damage you. So anything from setting yourself on fire, which you could, would end. I'm gonna be honest. Um, that would be pretty cool. Just like setting yourself on fire and saying, "Come get me if you can." That would be pretty cool. Um, let's see. Breaking out of prisons wouldn't be too hard because you literally invulnerability means you can't be damaged when you're hitting the wall. So that means either the wall is gonna get damaged or nothing's gonna happen because you're still weak and human. Another thing with invulnerability, like a flaw per se, doesn't take away the pain. I don't think people realize if you're invulnerable, you're still gonna be feeling it. It's just not gonna be harming you. It would be like if someone tried to cut off your arm. They still hit you. Your arm just isn't cut off, and that brings up an interesting thought. Invulnerability basically isn't regeneration or healing. So basically, if someone were to try cutting you, you wouldn't get cut. Let's see, if you got sick, you would get sick and you'd just die. So yeah, you'd be dead. And before you say, oh, invulnerability means I'm immune. Nope, that's immunity, first off. And second off, invulnerable, if a disease works fast enough, it's going to happen instantly and instantly kill you. No harm, no damage. You're just dead. So basically, if you had a magic spell that wished instant death on someone, you could probably kill someone and win. Well, you could probably beat someone that's invulnerable. Now for a little subsection: unstoppable object versus immovable one, or something along those lines. Let me look up the exact line. Okay, so here's an interesting thought. The immovable object versus unstoppable one. The immovable object, it won't move. No matter what you do, it will always maintain its position in the universe. Versus the unstoppable object. This means no matter what you do, you can't stop it. So, unstoppable object basically means it's impossible to stop or prevent the said object, which means you could argue two different things. Well, I personally believe one, but suffice to say, here's the thing: if something is an immovable object, here's an interesting thought. Does immovable mean that no matter what you try to do, it will always maintain a constant environment so that it stays in the same spot? So, like, let's say I were to throw a meteor at Earth just for fun, or an asteroid. Would it prevent the Earth from being destroyed so that it could still stay in the same spot? Because without the Earth, it wouldn't be gravitationally bound to the same location. Interesting thought, because the immovable object would need either it would require infinite nullification. So, like, it could nullify any amount of energy, even an infinite amount. Then again, an unstoppable object has an infinite amount of energy. So, here's the two winged situations. An immovable object can't be moved, and an unstoppable object cannot be stopped. So unstoppable means impossible to prevent. So I'd probably say this. When the unstoppable or the immovable object gets ran at by you, the unstoppable one, you're basically gonna either run into me and we're both gonna blink out of existence, That's what some people think. I personally think this though. You will eventually so you will eventually either move me if unstoppable in this context means you literally can't be stopped in what you're trying to achieve. So you'd eventually move me, but it could be at the end of time, which is infinite. Or it means this, which is really interesting because no one talks about it. If I'm the immovable object and you're the unstoppable force, why can't you just phase through? I wouldn't be stopping your um I wouldn't be stopping you and you'd still be moving. And I would still maintain my position. So what if that's what every immovable object does? It just phases so that nothing ever hits it. Really interesting thought that I don't think I've heard a lot of people talk about. Um let's see. Let's go back to that top 10 asked for powers. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Time travel. Okay, actually, I need to get my charger. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Time travel, like I said. Um, well, I feel like this deserves its own video, but here's some interesting thoughts with time travel. Would you kill someone to stop a terrible event like World War II? Like, would you kill Hitler to stop World War II? Um, Funnily enough, there have been several opportunities in his. There were actually there have been multiple opportunities throughout history for these being people like Genghis Khan, Hitler, Stalin to all have been killed off or died, but they didn't die or weren't killed off. So that's really interesting. Let's see. For time travel, time is a relative concept, so you could argue that anywhere in the present could be a considered like a different time, quote unquote, or something like that. I don't know. But suffice to say, you could argue that you could move anywhere through space too. So, would you like? Here's an interesting story thought for anyone trying to come up with one. An alien basically comes to another planet that's that's currently primitive life stage and whatnot, and they time travel, so they move backwards in time or forwards in time, but to this other world far from their own, and basically their existence here leaves a part of them that accelerates that life's evolution, and then they discover, oh, this guy caused it, or oh, there's no one in the present who could possibly have caused this, and so they realize, oh wait, it has to be someone from the future, which is really interesting thought. But yeah, we went over invulnerability, magnetic control. I'm gonna be honest. The idea of manipulating the iron in someone's blood, interesting, but you'd require ridiculous levels of power. At that point, you'd probably be more of a danger to the planet, and really, your powers have no point if it destroys the planet. But that's a discussion for another day. Just kidding, I'm not interested in that. Spider sense. Okay, that's specific to Spider Man, and I don't intend to learn about spiders because I'm gonna be honest, I dislike them. Plant control. Okay, here's an interesting one. Ah. So for plant control, what happens if someone decides, I'm gonna turn the plants inside your gut into a full blown tree or something, or back to what it was, and then that ends up killing you? You know what would be interesting, weirdly enough, dark dot alert? Just having people eat this flavored paper and then eventually just saying, haha, got you, and turning the paper back into a tree and then killing them instantly. Pretty dark, I know, but that's interesting to me. Because if plant control means anything that originates from a plant, you could arguably manipulate paper. You could manipulate maybe even food. Like, that would be interesting. Like, if I had control over plants, I'd be making a bunch of food and then selling it, or I'd be screwing the economy over. I know I say I like to mess with the economy a lot, just like to mess with them because the government's like mid, but that's something I do for fun. Another thing with plant control is plants, like, if plant control means, like, you can control any plant or any plant matter, I could argue that I can control plants way back in the past, or I can manifest in plants in the past and go like that would be just pretty interesting. Like, control, turning that control into a connection instead. You could basically become a historian, a very rich historian because you're seeing the past and you're telling people about it, but a historian. Like, trees and plant matter are everywhere because it's been everywhere. Every human has eaten it, I'm sure. So, lo and behold, you become this knowledge bank of like, oh, I know about this person's sicknesses and diseases because they ate this. Or, oh, I can see into the past this far because trees existed way back then. Funnily enough, a power like that where you're able to see into the lineage itself and see way back into the past of it, and by default everything that happened in that said past, would be better if you got it for something like sharks. Sharks are older than trees, and they're older than the rings of Saturn, so pretty interesting, like, if you could connect all sharks instead. But, hey, this isn't an underrated superpowers video, this is an analysis of the morals and ethics. Precognition. Here's the dictionary definition of precognition. Foreknowledge of an event, especially foreknowledge of a paranormal kind. So basically, this is being able to see is the knowledge of an event before the event itself happens. I wonder, an interesting thing for foreknowledge, like, does this just mean, like, a certain amount of time in the future? Like, 40 years from the future, I see a random event where someone dies or something like that? Or does this mean, like I know only a few seconds? It doesn't really say. But suffice to say, precognition would be pretty interesting. Also, knowledge isn't something you're at. It's not like smarts per se. It's not something that you actively maybe have. It's something passive, stored. So here's an interesting thought for someone with precognition. What if someone like a villain or a hero has precognition secretly, and that's why they've always been prepared for every battle, because they secretly knew what was going to happen in the future. Then, of course, precognition doesn't mean you have the ability to change the future. That would be something like Yuhabak's Almighty. But suffice to say, precognition's interesting. Just imagine the horror of knowing everything that's going to happen in the future. But you can't change the events because, like, it literally is destined to happen. You're seeing the event, but you can't change the outcome. Another interesting thought: what if time isn't linear and the future is forming the past? That's a thought for another day that I'll expand on later. But suffice to say, the idea is pretty simple. there's this absolute point in the future. This event is a necessity and absolute. It will happen in the future. So, in turn, it creates its own past events in order to make sure said past leads up to that future so it's solidified in existence. And all these offshoot timelines we have are just other possible ways that this absolute future point could come into reality. Suffice to say, if time works that way, then precognition would be enabling you to see into the past and the future. Arguably. But that's a video for another day. You'll have to ask/remind me in the comments or Discord if you want to see that. Let's see, evolution, like the ability to evolve, like reactive evolution. Let's see that actually. I'm afraid. Excuse me.